Large crowds across the U.S. are joining rallies against the Trump administration. More than 2,500 protests under the banner of the No Kings movement are taking place. The protesters say they are standing up against Donald Trump's authoritarian policies, accusing him of believing his rule is absolute. Top Republicans have condemned the gatherings, calling them Hate America rallies.
A constitution, not a king. It's a rallying cry for protesters all across the United States. More than 2,500 events are being held under the banner of the No Kings movement. Demonstrators say they're fighting against the Trump administration's authoritarian policies. With his vast immigration crackdown, mass firing of federal workers, as well as attacks on political opponents, the media, and judicial independence, protesters have outlined a long list of grievances against the president.
He is dismantling every safeguard that we've had for our country and our democracy, and we need to do something. And everyone needs to be out in the streets and saying something, protesting, and putting an end to this, because it's not sustainable the way we're going.
In Washington, independent Senator Bernie Sanders accused the Republican Party of submitting to the interests of the wealthiest 1% in American society, Trump included.
I'm talking about a billionaire class who believe that they have the divine right to rule, and who not only want massive tax breaks for themselves, but who reject any form of accountability or checks on their power. We will not move toward authoritarianism in America. We, the people, will rule.
Republican politicians have largely dismissed the mass demonstrations, with some referring to them as Hate America rallies. But the protests even drew hundreds to the streets in Florida, where Trump is spending the weekend at his Mar-a-Lago home.
It is intimidating. You do feel silenced, because this is Trump and MAGA country down here. But as you can see, there's a lot who also believe in freedom and that the Constitution still matters.
For the millions rallying across all 50 states, that Constitution and the democracy it represents are worth protesting to protect.
For more on this, I'm now joined by Ethan Bearman. He is an adjunct professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles and a California talk radio host. Welcome to DW, Mr. Bearman. Do you think Trump is concerned or even feeling pressured by these kinds of protests?
Interestingly, I don't think he's terribly concerned about the protests. The only thing that he's worried about, it appears right now, is whatever it is he thinks matters in front of his own face at that moment. More importantly, part of what these protests are likely connected to is the ongoing effort by the Trump administration to pressure states into further gerrymandering districts so they don't lose the midterm House elections next year, which would remove this kind of complete power that President Trump has over the federal government right now.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this protest movement getting even bigger then in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think it will. And I think there are a lot of reasons why. One, the absolutely poorly planned and poorly executed tariff implementation by this administration is harming everyday Americans, including farmers across the Midwest who can't sell to China anymore due to the president's unilateral actions. Further, we have the layoffs and the furloughs from the federal government that are affecting now numerous communities around the United States, including Trump voting communities such as Ogden, Utah. And so this continues to grow. It continues to be more pain. And as soon as Americans figure out that 5 to 10 million of them are going to have their health insurance costs double, I would strongly believe that these protests are going to increase in size fairly dramatically.
Fairly dramatically, okay. Now, top Democrats have also joined these protests. Could this be a chance for them to strengthen their party?
You know, it's very interesting. The Democrats have had a challenge in this term of President Trump's. This is his second term. He's been in office about 9 more months now. this time around. And they have had a very difficult time coalescing around singular and easy to understand messages. I genuinely believe that the health insurance issue is going to be a huge one, but also reaching out to the farmers. But the biggest challenge I see for the Democrats is unifying around a message on how they are going to help the average American, not just the idea of no kings and preserving our democracy, but we know from data that Americans turn out to vote based on their own pocketbooks, not kind of big picture ideas for the most part.
You've already alluded to this, but how does the government shutdown that's now in its third week play into these protests?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I want to start by prefacing by saying the way a government shutdown works here in the United States is the Congress has to pass spending resolutions. That's the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then the president has to sign them. The president has been very clear in his desire for this shutdown, to leverage this shutdown to further reduce the federal workforce, to further consolidate power under the executive branch, under something that used to be mocked called the unitary executive theory, which is being executed rather swiftly right now by this administration. So the government shutdown is actually something the Republicans have total control over. And before anybody wants to argue that point, they did it with Trump judicial nominees. You don't have to have any Democratic votes in the Senate. More so, what we've also seen with this president is more executive orders in his first 9 months here in office in his second term than the entire Biden administration did in one term. But more so, over 4 years and 9 months of Trump's presidency, he has leveraged the executive power more than 12 years total of Biden and Obama in their presidencies. So this shutdown is just part of his strategy under Project 2025, which he claimed to disavow, but clearly has bought into and is executing upon now.
That's Ethan Bearman, adjunct professor at Loyola Law School. Thank you so much for all of that context today.
Thank you.
And DW correspondent Bearman Alvarez-Gruber is following the protests in Washington, D.C. Earlier, he told me more about what the protesters are demanding.
As the No Kings protest name says, many of the protesters are accusing President Trump of acting rather like a monarch than an elected official. They are accusing him on attacks on the First Amendment. It's a very diverse crowd gathering here in Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue. A large crowd stretching for several city blocks. There is a stage there, and we've seen pictures from other big cities here in the United States, from New York and also from Boston. More than 2,500 bigger and smaller cities are taking part in this protest here, and organizers are expecting today's protest to be even bigger than the last nationwide King's protest that we saw in June here in the US.
And Bearman, how are Donald Trump and his allies reacting to what's going on?
The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Republican Mike Johnson, called this a hating America protest. Many have been using this rhetoric of trying to paint or trying to blame the protesters, those who are heading out on the street to protest against the Trump administration, as being anti-American, anti-patriots. But we've seen many American flags and many of the protesters trying to change that. A huge crowd, of course, many different motives for those who are out here today. Some attacking, some criticizing the Trump administration, especially also for the raids that we've seen with ICE, with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There's a lot of police also surrounding this area, and that's of course one of the bigger concerns also in the protests in Chicago, where recently we've seen this increase of law enforcement, of Border Patrol, of ICE carrying out those operations. So that's something that the speakers on stage are referring over and over again, criticizing that crackdown by the Trump administration.
Yeah, and Bearman, some states have deployed National Guard troops. How big are the concerns that these protests could escalate?
So here in Washington, the National Guard is rather on places that are really touristy. We've seen them on metro stations where many of the protesters here arrived today because a lot of the downtown area has been closed off for vehicles. So many of them approached this area with the subway. But that's one of the bigger concerns that they have. If in case some of these protests might turn violent also later in the afternoon, later in the evening, with this increased law enforcement, with the National Guard that has been deployed here in the city as part of the visuals of many of the tourists that we also just had a moment to talk to some of them, that there are deployed to cities like Washington, also to Chicago. There's been this back and forth also that they were not able to deploy. It was the National Guard of Texas, but that is one of the bigger concerns and also one of the bigger changes if we compare today's protest with the one that we saw in June of this nationwide no kings protest in the US.
That was DW correspondent Bearman Alvarez-Gruber in Washington, D.C. Thanks a lot, Bearman.